Welcome back to the Historian's Tome, where we journey into the forgotten corners of the past and breathe life into the stories of ancient civilizations. If you enjoy falling asleep to history, told in a calm and detailed way, make sure to subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the mysteries of the world's greatest cultures. Tonight, we begin with one of Africa's most enduring enigmas, the stone city of Great Zimbabwe. As the sun sets over southern Africa, imagine a land where rolling hills stretch far into the horizon, where valleys are cloaked in morning mist, and where birds rise in spirals from the grasslands as dawn breaks. In the heart of this landscape lies a place unlike any other, a vast complex of stone walls, towers and passageways that still stand after centuries of abandonment. These are the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a city carved from stone, silent yet powerful, mysterious yet enduring. The land itself is beautiful and harsh, a region where granite outcrops rise from the earth like the bones of ancient giants. Great Zimbabwe is nestled among these natural formations in the southeastern hills of modern-day Zimbabwe. The Shashe and Limpopo rivers flow not far from here, watering the valleys that supported communities for centuries. The soil is fertile in pockets, though fragile if overworked. This mixture of abundance and limitation created both opportunity and challenge for those who called the region home. Standing before the ruins, you would notice how the stone blends almost seamlessly into the land. The builders worked with the granite available around them, splitting massive blocks into smaller pieces, shaping them carefully, and stacking them into towering walls that rise as high as 30 feet. These walls were constructed without mortar. Each stone was cut and placed so perfectly that the structures have stood for nearly 1,000 years, enduring wind, rain, and the passage of countless generations. The craftsmanship speaks not only to technical skill, but also to vision, for this was no mere village. It was a city of ambition, a seat of power, and a place meant to last. At its height, Great Zimbabwe stretched across nearly 800 hectares, making it one of the largest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa during the medieval period. Yet for all its size and sophistication, much about it remains hidden. We know fragments of the story through archaeology, through oral traditions, and through the artifacts left behind. Still, the city guards its secrets closely, as if the stones themselves are reluctant to reveal too much. The first impression one has when gazing upon the great enclosure or the hill complex is one of awe. The great enclosure, the most famous part of the ruins, is an immense circular wall that curves gracefully across the landscape. Inside stands the mysterious conical tower, whose purpose is still debated. Was it a granary, a symbol of abundance, or a ritual structure tied to spiritual beliefs? No one can say with certainty. The hill complex, perched on a granite outcrop, overlooks the valley below. It was likely the residence of rulers, a place of both political and religious authority. From these vantage points, the king could see across his lands, over the people, the cattle, and the trade routes that connected his city to the wider world. When outsiders first stumbled upon these ruins, centuries after their abandonment, they were stunned. Portuguese explorers traveling inland from the coast in the 16th century heard stories from local communities of a grand stone city in the interior. But the ruins themselves were not described in detail until the 19th century, when European adventurers, missionaries, and treasure hunters began to write about them. To these outsiders, the scale and precision of Great Zimbabwe seemed unbelievable. Many refused to accept that it could have been built by the ancestors of the Shona people who still lived in the region. Instead, they speculated wildly, attributing the structures to the Phoenicians, to Arabs, even to the lost tribes of Israel. These ideas were not born from evidence but from colonial prejudice, a refusal to credit African societies with the ability to create such enduring monuments. The myths surrounding Great Zimbabwe spread quickly, feeding the imagination of the outside world. Writers described it as a city of gold, perhaps connected to the legendary mines of King Solomon. Treasure hunters scoured the ruins, tearing into walls and digging through enclosures in search of riches that were never there. In their search, they disturbed and often destroyed the very evidence that could have told us more about the lives of the people who lived here. Yet even with their damage, the ruins remained. Silent, imposing and unyielding, they continued to watch the landscape, whispering of a story that outsiders could not fully grasp. Today, we know better. Archaeology has confirmed that Great Zimbabwe was indeed the creation of the ancestors of the Shona people. The city's grandeur was not borrowed from some faraway culture, but born from local genius, local resources, and local traditions. This truth adds even greater weight to the ruins. They are not the relic of a lost foreign colony, but the proud achievement of African kings, artisans, and communities who left behind something eternal. The mystery, however, has not faded. Walking through the stone passageways, you might hear the wind whistle between the rocks and feel the coolness of the shaded enclosures. You might wonder who once lived in the small, circular huts that dotted the courtyards, or who gathered at the foot of the conical tower. What voices filled these spaces with music and debate? What rituals echoed against the walls in the glow of torchlight? These questions linger because the stones keep their silence. Great Zimbabwe embodies both history and enigma. On the one hand, it is a city firmly rooted in time, built during the medieval centuries when Africa's inland trade networks flourished. On the other, it is a place that resists full explanation. Its walls stand as metaphors for the resilience of human achievement, but also for the limits of what we can ever truly know. We can trace trade routes, analyze pottery, and study the placement of walls. But the lived experiences, the hopes, the fears, and the dreams of its people remain just beyond our reach. As we close this opening chapter, we step back from the ruins for a wider view. Great Zimbabwe sits quietly in the southern African hills, surrounded by silence. No king rules from the hill complex now. No cattle are penned within the stone enclosures. No markets bustle with merchants trading beads, ivory, and gold. And yet the city lives on. It lives in the name of the nation of Zimbabwe itself, which chose this heritage as its symbol of identity and strength. It lives in the questions we continue to ask, in the research carried out year after year, and in the wonder felt by those who stand before the stones for the first time. This is the land of stone and silence, a land that once rang with life, power, and ambition, and that still whispers to us across the centuries. In the chapters that follow, we will step deeper into its history, uncovering the rise of the Stone Kingdom, the wealth that poured into its markets, the beliefs that shaped its culture, and the eventual decline that left the city abandoned to the elements. For now, let the stones stand in your imagination as sentinels of mystery, their silence inviting you to dream of what once was. Long before the towering stone walls of Great Zimbabwe stood in the southern African landscape, the seeds of its greatness were planted by early settlers. These were Bantu-speaking peoples who began moving into the region many centuries ago, bringing with them new skills and ways of life. They were farmers, tending to fields of millet and sorghum, and herders, guiding cattle across the grassy hills. Their lives were shaped by the rhythms of the seasons, the fertility of the soil, and the importance of livestock. Cattle were more than just a source of food. They were wealth, status, and spiritual connection all at once. To own cattle was to hold power within the community. They provided milk, hides, and meat, but also played a role in rituals and in the forging of alliances between families. Alongside farming, this foundation of herding allowed early communities in the region to grow in stability. Villages clustered together, sometimes near rivers or fertile valleys, sometimes upon higher ground for protection. These were the roots from which the future stone city would eventually rise. By the 11th century, a remarkable transformation was underway. What had been small farming and herding communities began to gather into something larger. The region of Great Zimbabwe, with its rich soils and abundant granite, became the center of growth. Archaeological evidence shows that the population expanded rapidly during this time, with more people settling around the hills and valleys. Houses multiplied, markets grew, and trade networks spread outward. This growth was not accidental. It was fueled by the land's position within a wider web of commerce. Gold deposits lay not far from the city's future site, as well as ivory drawn from elephant herds. These goods were highly sought after in the wider world, particularly along the eastern coast of Africa, where Swahili city-states traded with Arab and Asian merchants. As wealth flowed in, Great Zimbabwe began to rise from a loose collection of villages into a central hub of power and influence. At first, the settlements were built from more humble materials. The earliest houses were made of wood, clay, and thatch, much like other villages across the region. They were circular in shape, grouped together in small clusters, and surrounded by fences to keep out animals. Yet as the city's population and wealth increased, the leaders of Great Zimbabwe sought to create something far more enduring. This was when the transition from huts to stone began. Builders turned to the granite hills that surrounded the site. Granite, when exposed to the elements, naturally breaks into manageable slabs. By carefully shaping these stones, the builders developed a technique of stacking them without mortar. Each stone was placed with precision, fitted against the others so tightly that the walls could rise several meters high and remain stable. This method, known as dry stone walling, was not only practical but also an extraordinary display of craftsmanship. From these techniques, the first great enclosures and walls took form. What began as modest stone structures soon grew into monumental works. Walls rose across the hillsides, sometimes as thick as 6 feet at the base, curving and bending with deliberate grace. Passageways were designed to control the flow of people, creating both privacy and order. Some areas were reserved for the elite, others for communal life, and still others may have served as sacred spaces. The craftsmanship of these walls went beyond function. The builders understood symmetry, pattern, and balance. Some sections of wall were decorated with chevron and herringbone designs, carved into the stone itself. These were not random embellishments but symbols of meaning, perhaps reflecting cultural identity or spiritual beliefs. The act of building with stone was itself symbolic, marking a shift from temporary structures to monuments intended to last across generations. This architecture spoke of authority. Only a community with strong leadership could organize the labor required to quarry stone, transport it, and build such massive walls. It is likely that by the 12th century, Great Zimbabwe had developed a social order centered on powerful rulers. These kings, often referred to as the Mambos, held both political and spiritual authority. Their control was reinforced through the visible might of the stone walls and the organization of the city. The rise of leadership also meant the rise of hierarchy. Archaeological evidence suggests that different groups within the settlement lived in different zones, separated by walls and enclosures. The ruling elite occupied the most prominent positions, often on the hill complex overlooking the valley, while commoners lived in simpler dwellings below. Cattle pens and storage areas reflected wealth and control, for the ability to manage resources was the foundation of power. Yet even within this hierarchy, Great Zimbabwe was not built by rulers alone. The city's success was the result of cooperation across the community. Craftsmen shaped stone and pottery. Farmers cultivated crops to feed the growing population. Herders managed cattle herds that symbolized prosperity. Traders carried goods along routes that linked the city to the wider world. Each person's labor, whether humble or grand, contributed to the kingdom's rise. The scale of growth during this period is difficult to overstate. At its height, Great Zimbabwe may have housed between 10,000 and 20,000 people. For a city in this part of Africa during the medieval period, this was immense. The settlement sprawled across the hills, connected by stone walls and paths. With bustling markets, and a network of enclosures that reflected both order and complexity. What began as scattered Bantu-speaking villages had transformed into the heart of a kingdom. By the end of the 13th century, Great Zimbabwe was no longer a local settlement. It had become a capital, a political and economic center that commanded respect across the region. Its stone walls declared permanence. Its organization reflected ambition, and its wealth, drawn from trade, placed it firmly within the networks of the wider medieval world. The story of this rise is a story of vision. Vision of leaders who saw in stone the power to endure. Vision of craftsmen who turned raw granite into living architecture. Vision of communities who worked together to create something greater than themselves. The kingdom that emerged was not just a collection of buildings, but a living society, bound together by culture, trade, and belief. As we look back at this period of growth, we see the foundations of everything that would follow. The trade wealth that brought prosperity, the walls that gave the city its iconic identity, the social structures that shaped life within the enclosures. All of these elements were born in this era of expansion and ambition. From here, Great Zimbabwe would only grow stronger, its walls rising higher, its rulers commanding more power, and its influence stretching farther across Africa and beyond. This was the rise of the Stone Kingdom, a transformation from earth and clay to granite and permanence. A moment in history when vision, labor, and leadership came together to carve a place into the land that would never be forgotten. As the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rose higher and the kingdom grew in strength, the city entered a new phase in its history. It was no longer only a political center or a collection of stone enclosures. It became a hub of wealth, trade, and influence that reached far beyond the hills of southern Africa. The city was alive with the sound of markets, the lowing of cattle, the striking of hammers, and the voices of merchants who carried goods to and from distant lands. Great Zimbabwe's power was built upon trade. The location of the city placed it in a strategic position between the gold fields of the interior and the trading ports of the Indian Ocean coast. Rivers and overland routes connected the capital to the Swahili city-states that lined the East African coast. From there, merchants carried goods across the seas to Arabia, Persia, India, and even China. This web of exchange transformed the stone city into a place of immense prosperity. Gold was the lifeblood of this economy. Southern Africa was rich in deposits, and the people of Great Zimbabwe knew how to mine and process it. Gold dust and nuggets were collected, refined, and prepared for trade. Merchants traveled with it to the coastal ports, where it was exchanged for luxury goods and essentials alike. The wealth generated from gold mining and trade allowed the rulers of Great Zimbabwe to command loyalty, maintain their authority, and continue the construction of monumental stoneworks that still awe visitors today. Ivory was another major export. Elephant herds roamed the region, and their tusks were highly valued across the Indian Ocean world. Ivory was carved into ornaments, tools, and religious objects in distant lands, and merchants paid dearly for it. To control ivory was to control another stream of wealth. Combined with gold, it gave Great Zimbabwe influence not just in Africa, but across continents. The connections of the city extended farther than many might imagine. Archaeologists working in the ruins of Great Zimbabwe have uncovered remarkable evidence of long-distance exchange. Fragments of Chinese porcelain have been found among the stones, carrying delicate designs that speak of distant workshops in Asia. Glass beads from Persia have also been unearthed, each one a silent witness to trade networks stretching thousands of miles. Arabian coins discovered at the site provide further proof that Great Zimbabwe was part of the thriving world economy of the medieval period. These discoveries are not simply curiosities. They demonstrate that the people of Great Zimbabwe were participants in a global system of trade that linked Africa to the wider world centuries before European contact. Within the city itself, the wealth generated by trade was reflected in its architecture and social order. The most impressive of all structures were the hill complex and the great enclosure. The hill complex, perched on a granite outcrop, served as the heart of political and possibly religious authority. From here, the rulers could look out over the valley, commanding not only the settlement below, but also the trade routes that flowed through the land. The hill complex contained passageways, walls, and platforms that may have been used for ceremonies or governance. It was a place of power in every sense. The great enclosure stood apart as a symbol of the city's might and ambition. Its outer wall stretches for more than 200 meters, rising as high as 10 meters in places, and curving with precision across the landscape. Within this enclosure stands the mysterious conical tower, one of the most recognizable features of Great Zimbabwe. Though its exact purpose remains debated, scholars believe it may have symbolized abundance or fertility. Others suggest it was connected to religious or ritual functions. Whatever its meaning, it stands as a statement of authority, a physical reminder of the wealth and vision of the kingdom's rulers. These great structures were not merely functional. They were designed to impress, to embody the power of kingship, and to reinforce the order of society. The effort required to build them, the organization of labor, and the precision of design all point to a society that valued both symbolism and permanence. The walls were more than barriers. They were markers of identity and pride, as enduring as the granite from which they were carved. Yet wealth and power were not measured only in stone and gold. Cattle held a place of equal, if not greater importance, within the society of Great Zimbabwe. To the people of the kingdom, cattle were more than livestock. They were symbols of prestige, essential to daily life and central to spiritual belief. Herds were managed carefully, and ownership of large numbers of cattle marked a family's status within the community. They were used in trade, given as gifts to secure alliances, and offered in rituals to honor ancestors and spirits. Cattle enclosures within the city were as significant as the stone walls themselves. Archaeologists have identified areas where herds were likely kept, evidence of their central role in the economy and culture. Cattle provided milk and meat, but their value extended far beyond sustenance. They were a living currency, a measure of wealth that could not be carried away like gold or ivory. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe drew their authority in part from their control over herds, just as they did from trade and stone architecture. The combination of trade, architecture, and cattle created a society that was both complex and resilient. Farmers continued to cultivate millet and sorghum, providing food for the growing population. Craftsmen shaped stone walls, pottery, and iron tools, contributing their skill to the prosperity of the kingdom. Traders moved along paths that connected the capital to the coast, carrying gold, ivory, and other goods. Rulers presided over ceremonies, maintained order, and displayed their power in the very stones of their enclosures. At its height, Great Zimbabwe was home to perhaps 20,000 people. Its markets would have bustled with activity. Imagine walking through its narrow stone passages into open courtyards where merchants displayed beads, pottery, iron tools, and woven cloth. Cattle grazed nearby, their presence a constant reminder of wealth and sustenance. Children played in the dust, women pounded grain, and messengers came and went from distant places. The air would have been filled with a sense of activity, of a city alive with purpose. This was the city of wealth and trade, the stone capital of a kingdom whose influence extended across Africa and beyond. Its prosperity was not an accident, but the product of careful control of resources, visionary leadership, and the ability to connect with distant markets. Great Zimbabwe was a city where the stones themselves spoke of permanence, where gold and ivory tied the people to a global network, and where cattle anchored daily life and spiritual meaning. In this chapter of history, we see Great Zimbabwe at its most powerful, a city that commanded trade routes, inspired awe with its architecture, and thrived on the wealth of its land. It was a kingdom that balanced the grandeur of stone with the living heartbeat of cattle, and that transformed its wealth into symbols of power that still stand today. To understand Great Zimbabwe fully, we must go beyond its walls of granite and its bustling trade. The city was not only a political and economic power, but also a place of deep spiritual meaning. Belief and power were closely tied together, shaping how the people understood their world, how they built their city, and how they recognized the authority of their rulers. Religion in Great Zimbabwe was not organized in the way of later world religions, with temples, scriptures, or large priestly classes. Instead, it was woven into every part of life. Archaeology and oral traditions from the Shona people suggest that rituals, ancestor worship, and sacred spaces formed the foundation of spiritual practice. The ancestors were believed to remain close to the living, guiding them, blessing them, or punishing them if neglected. Families made offerings of food, beer, or cattle to honor those who had passed, asking for protection in return. This deep respect for ancestors extended to the entire community. When a ruler died, his memory and spirit were believed to continue influencing the lives of the people. To honor him was to honor the kingdom itself. Rituals were not confined to households, but played out on a grander stage, connecting personal belief with political power. The hill complex, the most prominent structure within Great Zimbabwe, seems to have been a sacred as well as political center. Perched high on a granite outcrop, its walls and passageways overlook the valley below. Archaeologists believe that this was the residence of the rulers, yet its design suggests it also served a ritual function. Elevated above the rest of the city, it gave the king not only a strategic view of the land, but also a symbolic position closer to the spiritual realm. From here, ceremonies may have been performed to honor ancestors, call for rain, or affirm the authority of the ruler as a mediator between the living and the spiritual world. Stone itself carried meaning. Unlike wood or thatch which decay and vanish, stone endures. To build in stone was to create something eternal, reflecting both the permanence of the ancestors and the authority of kingship. The great enclosure, with its towering walls and the mysterious conical tower, embodies this symbolism. The walls curve with deliberate elegance, creating a sense of enclosure and separation from the outside world. Within them, the conical tower rises without windows or doorways, its purpose still debated. Some scholars believe it represented a granary, a symbol of fertility and abundance. Others see it as a sacred marker connected to rituals of kingship. Whatever its true function, its presence is commanding. It remains a silent yet powerful emblem of authority and belief. The passageways within Great Zimbabwe also held symbolic meaning. Narrow, winding corridors led from one space to another, controlling movement and creating a sense of transition. Entering such a passage may have been more than a physical act. It may have symbolized moving from the ordinary world into a sacred one, from daily life into ritual space. Architecture here was not only functional, but spiritual, shaping how people experienced their surroundings and reinforcing the sacred role of the city's leaders. Life in Great Zimbabwe was also rich in culture. Music filled the air during rituals, celebrations, and daily life. Instruments like drums and mbira or thumb piano were likely played in ceremonies and social gatherings. Songs carried both entertainment and meaning, connecting the people to each other and to their ancestors. Dance accompanied music with rhythmic movements that reflected harmony with the earth and with the spirits that guided them. Craftsmanship was another central part of society. Pottery from Great Zimbabwe shows both practicality and artistry, with decorated vessels used for cooking, storage, and ritual. Beadwork also flourished, with glass beads obtained through trade, transformed into ornaments that carried status and meaning. Ironworking provided tools for farming and hunting, but also weapons that symbolized power and defense. Each craft connected the community to the wider world of trade, while also serving the local needs of daily life. These cultural practices were not separate from belief. pottery used in rituals, beads worn during ceremonies, or music played for the ancestors all tied culture to spirituality. The city was alive not only with commerce, but with symbolic meaning, where even the most ordinary objects could carry spiritual weight. At the center of all this stood the king. Known as the Mambo, his authority was not purely political. He was seen as a sacred figure, one whose power came from the ancestors and the spirits. The Mambo acted as an intermediary between the human world and the divine, responsible for ensuring harmony, prosperity, and balance. If rains failed or crops suffered, it was often seen as a reflection of the ruler's ability to maintain favor with the ancestors. The king's authority was displayed in the very design of the city. By residing in the hill complex elevated above the people, the Mambo was both physically and symbolically set apart. His control of cattle, gold, and trade reinforced his status, but his sacred role gave him legitimacy. Rituals performed under his authority strengthened the bond between ruler and subjects, uniting them under a shared belief system. This fusion of belief and power gave Great Zimbabwe its strength. The people did not see their king as merely a political leader, but as someone whose position was sanctified by the ancestors. Obedience was not only a civic duty, but also a spiritual one. To resist the ruler was to resist the order of the universe itself. This sacred kingship was a common theme across many African societies, but at Great Zimbabwe, it took on a distinctive form, expressed in stone, ritual, and culture. Daily life in the city reflected this integration of belief and power. Families lived in circular huts clustered within enclosures, their homes marked by hearths, granaries, and small courtyards. Daily chores, such as farming, herding, and crafting, were carried out with the knowledge that ancestors watched over them, and that the king ruled as a bridge between worlds. Ceremonies punctuated the rhythm of life, from rituals of planting and harvest to rites of passage marking birth, adulthood, and death. Each moment of life carried spiritual resonance. Together, these elements created a society that was more than the sum of its parts. Architecture, ritual, craftsmanship, music, and leadership all intertwined to create a city that was not only functional, but deeply symbolic. The stones of Great Zimbabwe stand today not only as monuments of engineering, but as silent witnesses to a worldview where every wall, every tower, and every passage carried meaning. In this chapter, we see that Great Zimbabwe was not only a city of wealth and power, but also a city of spirit. Its rulers drew strength from their sacred role. Its people found meaning in rituals and traditions, and its very walls reflected beliefs about life, abundance, and the eternal presence of ancestors. To walk among the ruins today is to sense not only the echoes of trade and politics, but also the enduring spirit of a people who saw in stone the reflection of their world and their faith. Every great civilization carries within it both the seeds of growth and the weight of decline. Great Zimbabwe, once a thriving city of trade, culture, and power, eventually saw its fortunes wane. By the 15th century, its people had departed, leaving behind towering walls of granite that still rise against the African sky. To understand its story fully, we must explore both the causes of its decline and the later rediscovery that reshaped how the world viewed this extraordinary city. The decline of Great Zimbabwe is still debated by scholars. No single explanation captures the entire truth, but several theories provide insight into the shifting fortunes of the city. One possibility is environmental strain. The land surrounding Great Zimbabwe supported thousands of people and large herds of cattle. Over time, continuous grazing may have worn down the grasslands, while intensive farming could have depleted the soil. As the population grew, the land may have struggled to support the demands of both crops and livestock, eventually forcing people to look for more fertile ground elsewhere. Climate change may have played a role as well. Evidence suggests that the region experienced cycles of drought during the late medieval period. For a society dependent on rainfall to feed crops, water scarcity would have been devastating. Harvests would have failed, cattle would have weakened, and the prosperity that had fueled Great Zimbabwe's rise would have become harder to sustain. The delicate balance between environment and society may have tipped against the city. Shifting trade routes also shaped the destiny of Great Zimbabwe. The city had grown wealthy as a middle point in the trade of gold and ivory flowing to the Swahili coast. From there, merchants connected to Arabia, Persia, India, and even China. But trade networks are never fixed. By the 15th century, new centers of power and commerce began to emerge further north. Ports along the coast may have found direct sources of gold and ivory, reducing their reliance on Great Zimbabwe as an inland hub. With fewer caravans passing through, the city's economic lifeline weakened. The decline was not sudden or catastrophic, but gradual. By the 15th century, the city was largely abandoned. People migrated northward and southward, carrying their traditions with them. What they left behind were silent ruins, stripped of daily life yet still powerful in their presence. Cattle no longer grazed in the enclosures. The sound of drums and songs no longer echoed through the granite passageways, and the rituals that once honored ancestors in the hill complex came to an end. Yet the stones remained, a testament to a once thriving civilization. As Great Zimbabwe emptied, new centers of power rose in its place. The Mutapa state, located further to the north, inherited much of the region's political and economic influence. The rulers of Mutapa continued the trade in gold and ivory, maintaining links with the Swahili coast and foreign merchants. In many ways, they carried forward the legacy of Great Zimbabwe, transforming it into a broader story of shifting states and rising powers within southern Africa. Great Zimbabwe was not the end of a tradition, but part of an ongoing cycle of political change and cultural endurance. Centuries passed, and the ruins of Great Zimbabwe stood untouched, their history preserved in stone but hidden from the wider world. When European explorers and colonizers first encountered the site in the 19th century, they were stunned by the scale of its architecture. Massive stone walls, elegant curves, and towering enclosures rose from the earth, unlike anything they expected to find in the interior of Africa. Instead of recognizing that the ancestors of the Shona people had built this city, many Europeans refused to believe it could be the work of Africans at all. Colonial myths quickly took shape. Some explorers claimed the city must have been built by Phoenician traders who once sailed across the seas in search of gold. Others imagined Arabs or Persians as the builders, connecting Great Zimbabwe to the flourishing trade of the Indian Ocean. The most far-reaching theories even invoked the lost tribes of Israel, suggesting that the ruins were evidence of biblical wanderers settling in Africa. Each of these ideas had little to no evidence, but they revealed the prejudices of the time. Many colonizers could not reconcile the grandeur of Great Zimbabwe with their own misconceptions about African societies. These myths served a political purpose as well. By denying African origins for the city, colonial powers justified their control of the land. If outsiders had built Great Zimbabwe, then it could be claimed as part of a broader legacy of foreign civilization rather than an indigenous African achievement. This distortion of history lasted well into the 20th century, shaping how the site was presented and understood. But modern archaeology eventually dismantled these myths. Excavations in the 20th century revealed clear evidence that Great Zimbabwe was built by African hands. The pottery, tools, and cultural artifacts matched those of the Shona people. The dry stone walling techniques, once attributed to outsiders, were consistent with local building traditions. Imported goods like Chinese porcelain and Arabian coins confirmed trade connections, but they did not indicate foreign construction. Instead, they showed how far the reach of African trade extended. As more evidence came to light, scholars recognized Great Zimbabwe as one of Africa's greatest indigenous achievements. It was not a mystery built by distant peoples, but a city crafted by Africans for Africans in the heart of their own land. The myths faded, though their echoes remain as reminders of how history can be shaped or distorted by those who control the narrative. Today, Great Zimbabwe stands not only as an archaeological site, but as a symbol of cultural pride. It is a reminder of a kingdom that rose from small settlements to a powerful center of trade and belief, only to decline as fortunes shifted. Yet its legacy endures in the stones that still tower over the land, in the traditions of the Shona people, and in the broader history of Africa. The story of Great Zimbabwe's decline and rediscovery is not one of failure, but of transformation. The city may have been abandoned, but its spirit continued through successor states and living traditions. The ruins remain to challenge later generations, demanding recognition and respect. Through archaeology, patient study, and the voices of the descendants of its builders, the truth of Great Zimbabwe has been reclaimed. As we look upon the walls today, we see more than ruins. We see the remains of a civilization that mastered trade, architecture, and sacred kingship. We see the resilience of a people who adapted to changing environments and shifting routes of commerce. And we see the triumph of truth over myth, as the stones themselves speak louder than the distortions of colonizers. Great Zimbabwe's story does not end in silence. It endures as part of the larger narrative of Africa's past, a reminder of human ingenuity, cultural depth, and the ability of history to rise again, even after centuries of neglect. The stones that once enclosed a living city continue to stand, carrying within them the memory of belief, power, and resilience. They remain a testament to the greatness of Africa's past and a beacon for generations yet to come. As the sun rises over the rolling hills of southern Africa, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe cast long shadows across the grasslands. The stones, carefully placed by hands hundreds of years ago, continue to speak in silence. They no longer echo with the voices of kings, traders, and craftsmen, yet they remain a living symbol, carrying deep meaning for the people of Zimbabwe and for Africa as a whole. The story of this stone city did not end with its decline. Instead, it has taken on a second life as a source of cultural identity, national pride, and global recognition. One of the most powerful legacies of Great Zimbabwe lies in its role as a cultural anchor. For centuries, local communities told stories about the origins of the ruins, linking them to their ancestors and traditions. While colonial myths once attempted to erase African connections to the site, modern scholarship restored that link. Today, the Shona people and the wider population of Zimbabwe see the ruins not as a mystery built by outsiders, but as the enduring achievement of their forebears. The walls and towers are reminders that their ancestors were builders, traders, and leaders, capable of shaping an advanced society in the heart of Africa. This recognition has transformed Great Zimbabwe into a source of pride, a monument that embodies resilience and creativity. The cultural significance of Great Zimbabwe grew even stronger in the 20th century during the struggle for independence. As nationalist movements gained strength against colonial rule, the ruins became a rallying symbol. Leaders and activists pointed to Great Zimbabwe as proof of Africa's capacity for greatness long before European contact. The very name of the country, Zimbabwe, was chosen to honor this heritage. Derived from the Shona words for stone houses, the name reflects the grandeur of the ancient city, while linking the modern nation to its roots. National symbolism extends beyond the name itself. The flag of Zimbabwe carries an image of the Zimbabwe bird, a carved soapstone figure discovered among the ruins. These birds, standing tall and dignified, likely held religious or political significance for the builders of Great Zimbabwe. Today, they serve as emblems of continuity between past and present. Displayed on the national flag and other official insignia, the Zimbabwe bird is a proud reminder that the spirit of the stone city still watches over the nation. Recognition of Great Zimbabwe's importance has also extended to the global stage. In 1986, the ruins were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This designation not only highlights their cultural and historical value, but also places responsibility on the international community to protect and preserve them. Visitors from across the world travel to Masvingo province, where the ruins stand, to witness the majesty of the stone walls. Walking through the great enclosure or climbing the hill complex allows tourists to step into a landscape shaped by human ingenuity centuries ago. Tourism brings economic benefits to local communities, but it also poses challenges. Preservation is an ongoing concern. The granite walls, though sturdy, are still vulnerable to weathering and erosion. Human activity, including the constant flow of visitors, adds pressure to the fragile structures. Conservationists face the delicate task of maintaining access to the site while ensuring its protection for future generations. Efforts include stabilizing weakened walls, controlling vegetation that grows between the stones, and monitoring environmental conditions. These initiatives remind us that the legacy of Great Zimbabwe is not only a story of the past, but also a responsibility of the present. Despite decades of research, many questions about Great Zimbabwe remain unanswered. Archaeologists and historians continue to puzzle over the exact functions of its major structures. Was the hill complex primarily a royal residence, a sacred site, or both? What precise role did the conical tower play in ritual or symbolism? Why did certain areas of the city expand while others declined? Even the reasons behind the city's abandonment remain debated, with no single explanation agreed upon. Each new excavation uncovers artifacts that bring us closer to answers, yet the stones keep some of their secrets hidden. These mysteries add to the allure of Great Zimbabwe. In a world where many ancient cities have been extensively studied and reconstructed, the ruins stand as a reminder that history is never fully complete. The unanswered questions invite curiosity and imagination, allowing future generations of scholars and dreamers to engage with the site in new ways. Great Zimbabwe is both a monument and a puzzle, its silence challenging us to listen carefully for the echoes of the past. As we reflect on the legacy of Great Zimbabwe, it is clear that its importance goes beyond archaeology or national pride. The city represents human creativity at its highest form. Without mortar, its builders raised walls that have endured for centuries. Without written records, they left behind symbols and structures that still communicate meaning. Their achievements remind us that greatness is not defined solely by armies or empires, but by the ability to create, to connect, and to endure. Today, the ruins continue to inspire. For Zimbabweans, they are a cornerstone of identity, anchoring the nation in a proud heritage. For Africans across the continent, they are proof of a history too often overshadowed by colonial narratives. For the wider world, they are a sight of wonder, demonstrating the richness of human culture in all its forms. The stones of Great Zimbabwe remain silent, yet their silence is powerful. They do not speak in words, but in presence. They remind us that civilizations rise and fall, but their creations can outlast them, carrying forward messages of resilience and ingenuity. Standing before the great enclosure or tracing a hand along the granite blocks of the hill complex, one cannot help but feel the weight of time and the persistence of memory. Great Zimbabwe's story ends not in ruin, but in legacy. Its walls are more than broken stones. They are enduring symbols of human possibility. They connect past and present, linking the ancestors who built them with the generations who continue to live in their shadow. They remind us that history is not something distant, but something alive, carried in culture, identity, and pride. As the sun sets over the stone city, the walls glow with warm light, standing tall against the fading sky. The city may no longer be filled with the bustle of markets or the rituals of kings, but it continues to hold meaning for all who come to see it. The stones remain, unbroken and enduring, calling us to remember, to wonder, and to honor the legacy of Africa's great builders.